parents of children born through surrogacy are calling upon the government to act without delay as key parts of the Health Assisted Human Reproduction Act 2024 remain unimplemented. While the law was passed nearly 2 years ago, many families say they are still living with legal uncertainty, with children not fully recognised as having two parents under Irish law. Today, we're joined by two Clare mothers who know these challenges all too well. Fiona Whyte from Miltown Malbay, whose children Ruby and Donal were born through surrogacy in India, and Hilary O'Donovan from Kilrush, whose twins were born via surrogacy in Ukraine 10 years ago. And a very good morning to both of you, Fiona and Hilary, and thanks for being with us on this morning's show. Fiona, I might start with yourself. Can you tell us a little bit, about your family and your journey to becoming a mother through surrogacy, and how difficult or otherwise that process was?
Good morning, Alan. Yes, Donal and Ruby were born in September 2013 in India, so they're 13 years of age this year. Sean and I, we met later in life, I suppose, and we wanted to have children together, and we went through the usual process. We went through IVF a number of times, all unsuccessful. We tried adoption, the less said about that, the better. And then we went down the route of surrogacy with great fear, I suppose, and trepidation at the time. We didn't know anybody who had gone through that process before. There was no information available to us. Everywhere we looked for information, the door was closed, because surrogacy is neither legal or illegal in this country, and therefore none of the, I suppose, healthcare professionals or organisations could give us information. So we were really winging it at the time, and we ended up at the time going to India, and thankfully surrogacy worked out for us, and we have two very healthy, happy and active young lads at this stage. So that's our story in a nutshell.
I mean, even that kind of, it almost sounds like in limbo. It's neither legal nor illegal. And I know, Fiona, you've spoken previously about the bureaucracy involved as well. What kind of obstacles did you face with bringing your children home and establishing your family life here?
Well, we were 8 weeks in India. It was initially supposed to be 6 weeks, but we had difficulty getting the emergency travel documents in the end. We were up against many obstacles and bureaucracy, as you say, in trying to get our children home. I suppose the biggest thing, or the most significant thing to say is that, it's the uncertainty around it, because at that time when our children were born, neither parent were considered to be the legal parents of our children. So in essence, they were stateless at that point in time, because India, even though they were born there, they had Irish birth certs and they were considered to be Irish. But our country didn't consider them to be Irish, so we were really in limbo. We travelled back, and I suppose the situation today is exactly the same situation as it was back in 2013. Nothing has changed for us. So we came back, and the biological parent, my husband in that case, had to apply to the courts for a declaration of parentage. And we did that as soon as possible, because we wanted at least one parent in a position, I suppose, to make decisions for our children. I couldn't apply for anything because in Irish law, the birth mother is considered to be the legal mother. So even though there is no biological connection between my children and the birth mother, the surrogate mother, she is still considered to be the legal mother. So I had no rights whatsoever. So I had to wait. As the intended mother, my position was that I could only apply to the courts to obtain a guardianship order. That can only be obtained once I have been living with my children for more than 2 years, and only with the consent of the father. That remains the same today. That's the same situation. Until guardianship is obtained, so for the first 2 years of their life, I can't consent, or I couldn't consent to anything in relation to any aspect of their life. Medical treatment, creche, preschools, anything like that. So there's other implications. You have to consider if the father or the biological, the actual the person who has the declaration of parentage, if that person becomes terminally ill, if that person becomes incapacitated and can't make decisions, the children are left without a legal guardian or parent in the state. In the event of a relationship breakdown, maintenance, guardianship, custody, all of that can be weaponised against the second parent. For us at this stage, the significant point of concern for us at this stage is that guardianship expires at the age of 18. So when our children reach the age of 18, they no longer will have a legal relationship with me as their mother. And this then has, as you can understand, succession rights for our children.
Of course, yeah.
You know, they're 13. It's only another few short years. I remember, and you rightly said there, Alan, I remember back in 2013 talking about this on radio, TV, to the papers, and nothing has changed for us.
And I can't even begin to imagine how dispiriting that is over a decade on. The situation is exactly the same. Hilary, I mentioned your twins were born in Ukraine 10 years ago. Was your experience at the time and over the past decade filled with as many obstacles, hurdles, and what sounds like headaches and heartache as Fiona's experience?
Yes, our experience is varies. Good morning, Fiona. Very
morning, Hilary.
Yes, pretty much the same. We were coming from a slightly different angle in that I had a diagnosis of breast cancer and couldn't carry. So lots of parents in the state now choose surrogacy not as a first option, but Fiona, I'm sure, would agree with me. It's the last option. You know, you would ideally like to carry them yourself, or option or adoption or fostering, but all those avenues are closed to you once you have a health history of, for example, of cancer. You know. So, but yeah, exact same obstacles as Fiona. Yeah.
And did you have any expectation at any point, maybe perhaps early on in the decade that has passed, Hilary, that you might have seen progress, that or some sort of incremental progress at least?
Yeah, no, I didn't anticipate. I'm sure Fiona agreed with me. I certainly didn't think that 10 years later we'd still be here with nothing. You know, no, as Fiona said, like nothing. There's no sort of security for the children. They're discriminated against as a result of lack of regulation. So nothing has changed in 10 years. That's hugely disappointing. And there's no sense of urgency around it, you know, for, you know, such an important thing. The bill was passed in 2024 and signed by the President, but it just hasn't been enacted. So we're still waiting for that Section 12. If we had that, that would give our children security, you know. At the moment, they just have they've one parent in the state. If, God forbid, anything happens to that parent, as Fiona says, you know, the children are completely in limbo, you know. Yeah,
and Fiona gave us a great sense of what that's like. I mean, from your perspective, Hilary, what is it like to be a parent in every sense, but not be fully recognised as such under Irish law?
Yeah, it's very disappointing that your own country doesn't recognise you as the mother of the children. And it's not really until former Fine Gael Senator Mary Siri Kearney yesterday said her husband had a health event when they were on holidays, and she said it was terrifying. She was in another country. Now, thankfully, it was all resolved and he's fine. But it's only when these events occur, if you know, if you have an accident or something happens, and you think, oh, you know, it's terrifying. You have multiple layers there of you've got your partner, your husband, who could be seriously ill, and then you've got the knowledge that he is the only legal parent of your children. You know, so it's very worrying. You know,
Fiona, I wonder, you know, with the children themselves, you know, what their awareness of it is, or how you explain the situation to them, because, you know, your children, Hilary's children, see you rightly as their mother, but do you try and shield them from it until such an age as they might understand, or is it unavoidable because perhaps there are regular situations, everyday situations, maybe like school forms, medical consent, or like Hilary mentioned with Mary Siri Kearney, travel, where they can't help but notice the lack of recognition, and what do they make of that?
We've always, from the very start, been very, very open with Donal and Ruby around, you know, how they were born and how they came to be, if you like. They know they were born through surrogacy. we are open to a degree, I suppose, and it's around what they can understand in relation to the legal elements of this. They can't grasp the enormity of it. As far as they are, their understanding goes, I am their mother. They know that there is a surrogate mother, and they understand how that works and how that happened. But they are fully, of the opinion, if you like, that I am their mother. I'm the one that, looks after them, puts them to bed, reads them stories. They're at the sidelines every weekend at matches or whatever. So from that, I suppose they can only understand so much and take in so much. And, it's Sean and I that bear the burden of worry and concern in relation to this. We don't tell them that, when you turn 18, I'm no longer going to be recognised legally as your guardian.
Because I imagine they'd find that rather frightening.
Yes, and that's why we try to protect them from that element of it, because we are so concerned and we're so hopeful and, almost begging our government at this stage to commence this, at least this section of Part 12 of the bill, to recognise and to legalise our position as both parents, that they would have a legal position in relation to their children. But that's where it's at the moment, because I have guardianship. I can, I can consent and I can legally sign for my children. But that stops at 18, So they're adults at 18, and I don't have a legal connection or legal position in relation to my children at that stage. And it's a few short years away. If we have to wait now, which is, what's being proposed, to wait until the amendments to the bill are rectified and the regulatory authority established, that's going to be years. That's not going to, if you look at it, we're talking about this since 2013, and if I was being specific about it, we were talking about this in the media since 2005. This is how long this surrogacy is being discussed, and we're here still talking about it. I know we've made progress, of course we have, but there's no reason why this part in the bill can't be commenced to recognise and legalise past surrogacy. There's no reason why. My children will be 18 if we keep talking about it, and they'll have no legal connection to me.
And Hilary, I mean, your children are pretty similar age to my eldest, and I couldn't even begin to imagine trying to describe, the situation to her around if she was born through surrogacy, and at the age of 8, 9, 10. What to tell her and what not to tell her yet. Is that what it's been like for you, similar to Fiona, making your children aware they were born to a surrogate, but certain elements of it, maybe they're just too young to understand?
We told them from the time they could speak, little bite-sized information about it, so it wouldn't be some huge shock when you get to 10,
Yeah.
And I talk about it now and again, to the point where they go, "Oh, Mommy, not that again."
Too much information.
I try and weave it into conversations that so they have an understanding of it. But as Fiona said, you want to protect them. You don't want to frighten them and say, "Look, I'm not your legal guardian." So but yeah, age appropriate, sort of little nuggets of information as you go along. But yeah, it is. You wouldn't want to wouldn't want them to know the real picture there, because it's it's frightening, really. Like, we waited around for 2 years, and we really can't afford to wait another 2 years for this legislation to be enacted.
So, I mean, look, I guess, which is why this call has been made upon the government to act without delay, because let's face it, there's been more than enough delays up to this point as it stands. We know the briefing was held for TDs and senators, and Hilary, you were there. Can you give us a sense of how it went, how receptive the members were? I suppose the fact the briefing was being held in the first place would suggest they were keen to hear your side of the story. What was it, a positive briefing?
very positive, really positive. There seems to be great political will there. Martin Conway was there, and he said, although there seems to be a lack of urgency about it, things do get passed with great urgency at the same time. So it is possible, but there was a great political will there. A great number of TDs showed up. Lots of people spoke. Mostly we had a number of parents spoke, and also a girl born through surrogacy. She's 13 now, and she gave her story of what that meant for her as a child, knowing that she has no legal relationship with her mother. And that was, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when she spoke, really, Yeah,
I can well imagine. And look, it sounds like it was a very positive briefing, but were there any commitments from any of the TDs or senators there to run with this, run it up the food chain within their respective parties and try and get this process expedited?
Well, I can't say for sure that we got anything concrete, but hopefully with all the coverage it's getting and the fact that the conversation is out there, that they will see, and that there's real lives here and our children are being discriminated against, and that they will create they will create a sense of urgency around it.
Yeah, I mean, Fiona, it sounds like from what Hilary's saying that, there's certainly positives within the briefing, but I guess, as you say, this has been going on since 2005. The Act was passed 2 years ago, but hasn't been fully commenced. I guess you've all learned not to get your hopes up, that the proof will be in the eating of the pudding.
Absolutely. I was present when it was passed in the Dáil in 2024, and the excitement was palpable, and our children were there, and we really didn't expect to be sitting here still waiting for it 2 years on. So and I suppose the thing to be said, it's not only about legalising my position with our children. It's also providing for the legal protection of the surrogate mother and the intending parents, which is paramount as well. It would provide that legal framework or pathway, for the retrospective element of surrogacy to be progressed. And I'm just, we're 2 years on, and we're still in the same situation. So I would just implore the Department of Health and Department of Justice to enact, or to commence the section of the bill that would deal with past surrogacy.
Just finally, Hilary, what is the next step? Where do you all go from here? I mean, how long do you wait to see whether the positivity from yesterday's briefing lingers on into some concrete progression? And if it doesn't, after a period of time, what is the next step?
Well, we want this Section 12 to be passed. So that's the immediate request that we have. We're hopeful that that's what we would like. That's our greatest wish. As we've waited around for 2 years, so we can't afford to wait another 2 years. So there will have to be some sort of urgency created around this in order to put it into law,
Well, hopefully it will happen sooner rather than later, because it's gone on more than long enough at this point. Ladies, thank you so much to both of you for joining us, sharing your stories, and hopefully we'll see some sort of progression sooner rather than later. Hilary O'Donovan and Fiona Whyte, thank you to both of you for joining us on Morning Focus.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.